There's a police! There's a line.
You could do it to
fuel up, so he might be at the end of the line, may not happen. So we're going to try to get all of you guys on the bus and get you out right away. How we normally do it, we load every
amazing experience sitting up here in this theater that I went to all those years ago. So I'm thrilled to have this chance to talk with both of you.
Well, we're honored to have you here as well, and thank you for giving us the time to interview you and ask you questions about your life and all your achievements. We truly appreciate it.
Yes, we are so delighted that you're here. It's truly an honor, and thank you so much.
All right, I'm going to kick us off with our first question. We saw in the documentary about how you were rejected from NASA, stating women need not apply, and we even saw instances in school where you were restricted to positions like secretary rather than president as a result of your gender. But what is it that allowed you to challenge the status quo for females in leadership?
Well, first, I think the documentary, which is the first time I've seen it, did a really good job with all of my friends who participated in explaining the time in which we grew up, because it's important to reflect on where you come from and what's going on in the larger society. So we grew up in the post-World War II era. Every one of our fathers, as far as I can remember, had done something during World War II, mostly in the military. My dad had been in the Navy. So we were in a neighborhood filled with veterans who had served, and our mothers who had been involved in some way until they married, moved to the suburbs, and then every mother of every friend that I had was a full-time mom. And so I only knew women who had professional careers through my teachers and through the public librarians, because I spent a lot of time in the libraries here. And I really think it was the combination of both of my parents, but also my teachers. And I have to say, I, along with all of my friends and Betsy's family who are here, are just missing her so much at this moment, because she was kind of the glue that held us all together. And we had great teachers. I met my best friend Betsy in 6th grade at field school. And we had a teacher named Elizabeth King. And Mrs. King was a superb teacher, in part because she was always pushing us. You know, if you did a school assignment, she'd say, well, is that the best you could do? And she had a saying, don't hide your light under a bushel barrel, which comes from the Bible. And she would constantly be encouraging us, particularly the girls, which was unusual, to do more. And I went to Emerson. I just have to correct the record. I was one of the early classes at Emerson Junior High School. And again, terrific teachers, and then on to Maine East and on to Maine South. So I give both my parents, who passionately believed in education. My mom didn't get to go to college, and so they were absolutely determined that we would take school seriously and that we would go to college. And my teachers. So they created a different window for me to look through and think about. I've just written a book with my daughter. It's called The Book of Gutsy Women, and we share our experiences because, as I say, I didn't know women that worked outside the home other than the teachers and librarians, whereas by the time Chelsea was born in 1980, she, a pediatrician was a woman, the mayor of Little Rock, Arkansas, when she was a little girl, was a woman. So we compared the very different experiences we had and where each of us sought inspiration or motivation, role models, to try to figure out what to do with our own lives.
Yeah, thank you so much. In the documentary, it is mentioned that you were aware of, the other side of Chicago and the difference in privilege between various neighborhoods and parts of the city. Do you believe this has worsened or improved, and what do you think we as students can do to improve the situation and help strengthen the equality among the city of Chicago?
Great question. I give a lot of credit to my church. You saw a number of pictures of me with various friends. Ann Drake and her have pictures up there, talked about some of the work we did at the First United Methodist Church. And I really give church and the Sunday school teachers, and particularly our youth minister, Reverend Don Jones, an enormous amount of credit, because they were the ones who never let us just lapse into privilege, be like, okay, we're living in this really nice suburb and we have a wonderful school system and great parks and easy neighborhoods that support us. So the church was the place where we were always challenged, and Reverend Jones set up youth exchanges. So we would go into Chicago, we'd go and have youth exchanges in African American churches and Latino churches, where we'd sit in church basements and we'd talk to kids whose lives were different from ours, but what was most striking is how much we were alike. And so creating that sense of common experience and common humanity. So I would argue that things are better, but they're not good enough, and they only can be good enough if we recognize that everybody should be treated with dignity, and we should keep striving for equality and opportunity for everyone to take advantage of. So I'm very grateful to my faith and the upbringing that I had in the Methodist Church just down the street.
That truly is inspiring, and it seems with this and with everything else you've done that we've seen you go through, preparation has been sort of your key to success and all the hard work you've put in. However, what have you been least prepared for in everything you've done, specifically though running for president? What surprised you most?
Well, wow. Besides Russians, I think it is still the case, but certainly as we heard from my friends in the film, we just believed as we were, girls and then young women, that we did have to work extra hard. We had to be better prepared if we were going to be taken seriously. And so part of that was getting a good education and having experiences that would add to your understanding of yourself and the world around you. But there are so many events in one's life that you cannot predict. And so you have to be as prepared as possible to understand what it is that you're facing or what it is that is happening to you. So specifically about the 2016 campaign, there were so many unprecedented things about that campaign that I hope never happen again, but I fear could. I mentioned the Russians. It's beyond doubt, and I just wish every American would accept and understand that the Russians played a major role in the last campaign and are intending to do it again. I mean, they felt like they achieved their objective, and whether it's reports from independent investigations or a recent bipartisan report that the Senate Intelligence Committee just put out, they conducted a sweeping and systematic attack on our election through propaganda and maybe even through manipulation. That's something that is still being examined. So nobody was prepared for that. I certainly wasn't. My campaign obviously wasn't. So you have to be, we're living in such a fast-moving world right now. Technology has just sped up everything that we do, and the amount of information that comes at everybody. And how do you know whether the information is true or not? I personally was really disappointed that Facebook said, look, we're not going to judge the accuracy of ads that are on Facebook. So when a totally false attack filled with accusations that are absolutely untrue is put up, paid for to be on Facebook, and many millions of people see it, the response of Facebook is, well, that's free speech. Well, it is to a certain extent, but if you're up against the Russian military or a very well-funded political campaign on the other side, how do you ever get to the free, open exchange of accurate information? It's really difficult. Or when we now see technology that we saw a little bit of it in 2016, but it's more advanced now, taking words from what people say, like you, Charlotte, you say something here, and maybe you said something at school, and somebody has it on tape, and then they splice it together, and all of a sudden you're saying wacky, crazy things you've never said in your life, but it's your face, it's your mouth moving, it's your words coming out, and it's such a convincing fake. They did that to Nancy Pelosi a few months ago, and again, Facebook said they wouldn't take it down, even though it was admittedly a fake. So I was not prepared for the onslaught of weaponized information, propaganda with all kinds of crazy stories about me. You know, some of my friends, some of whom are here, went door to door campaigning for me in that last election in different parts of the country. And some of them told me they'd knock on the door and say they were here to ask the people living in the house to vote for me, and they'd say, "Oh, we can't, she kills people." And my friends would go, "Excuse me? I mean, really?" "Oh yeah, I saw it on the internet." So we've got to become not only smarter consumers, we have to become smarter voters. And we have to be really clear to hold candidates, whatever party you're a part of or no party at all, to hold candidates and campaigns to some standard of accuracy and truth. Otherwise, we're going to have a hard time figuring out who to really vote for, and we're going to have a hard time believing that the person we voted for actually was elected. So it's a serious challenge for the next time around as well.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah, that absolutely needed to be said. In the documentary, it is mentioned that in 1968 you were at an engagement shower in the midst of the riots at the Democratic National Convention, and you immediately left in order to try to make an impact. What prompted you to leave so urgently, and what were the thoughts that were running through your head?
Well, I went with my friend Betsy. Actually, she drove. She got access to her parents' car. We didn't have cars. And both of us couldn't believe what was happening. You know, we felt so lucky to grow up outside of Chicago. I love Chicago. I love the cultural institutions in Chicago. I love the diversity. I love everything about the city. And so the idea that there were riots happening in Grant Park, and it was so unthinkable. So we decided we would go and see what was occurring and try to figure out what, if anything, anybody could do. Well, we obviously had no idea what we were getting ourselves into, and never told our parents where we had been for many years. We got there, and we were, in the crowd in Grant Park, and people were pushing at the police, and the police were pushing back. And then all of a sudden, people behind us started throwing rocks, and I thought, that's the craziest thing I've ever experienced. I mean, what are they throwing rocks for? Because they're just going to hit people in the crowd, the whole thing, and you shouldn't be throwing rocks at the police anyway. So we didn't stay very long. It was out of control. It was so incredibly just unusual. We'd never seen anything like that. So we went, we looked at it, and then we looked at each other, and we said we have to leave because we didn't know what was going to happen next. We hadn't come to either get hit by a rock or beaten up or thrown in jail, so we decided we'd come home. It was the beginning, starting with President Kennedy's assassination, and then in '68, the assassination of Dr. King, the assassination of Bobby Kennedy, and then the riots in Chicago. It was a really confusing and quite frightening time to be our age. We were all, 20, 21, and we were trying to figure out what was happening in our own country. So it was a part of history we wanted to look at and try to understand. But it was way beyond anything we'd ever experienced before.
Unfortunately, this is sort of carried on into some politics today and our world today. So given the state of discourse around politics in our world today, what do you think needs to happen in order to foster civil and productive conversations that do lead to compromise and growth?
Boy, that's a great question. And I was at the, yes, let's give it I was at the University of Michigan yesterday and doing some speaking there. And I heard about a program that a group of Michigan students started from opposite sides of the political spectrum. Red, blue, Republican, Democrat, left, right, whatever you want to describe it. But they were people who shared a common concern about what's happening in our country and how we are engaged in such a divisive and destructive discourse. So they started meeting, and they started meeting just a small group, I think 6 originally. And they just started meeting and started talking. And now it's grown to many more students, and now it's, I think, live streamed when they meet and they talk, to try to model what it is that they can find common ground around. And even though they have deep disagreements about certain issues, to talk about how to resolve some of those disagreements. If you're upset about the immigration crisis, what can we do to have secure borders and humane immigration policies? That ought to be the approach, as opposed to making it a political football that just gets kicked back and forth at great human cost. And putting children in cages is not the answer. So how do you come to some resolution? There's another example. My husband and George W. Bush have a program where they select about 60 young adults every year. Bill selects 30, George Bush selects 30, and they're kind of by choice Democrats and Republicans, but they come together for a year. They go to the Bush Library, the Clinton Library, and the H.W. Bush Library, and the Johnson Library, and they work on projects together. And it is an amazing and very heartening transformation that occurs, because they come into this setting because they want to have the experience for themselves, and they leave realizing that they can work across these divides, they can find some common ground. And they have a graduation every year, and at the end of it, the Republicans come up to Bill, the Democrats go up to George W. Bush and say, thank you for having this program, because I never knew that I could actually listen to, respect, and work with somebody who had such a different political perspective. I give those 2 examples because I think we have to start at the ground level, at the grassroots level. Maybe something similar could be done at Maine East or Maine South and Maine West, something that would bring people together. There was a picture in the documentary of something called the Cultural Values Committee that I was asked to be on by the administration at Maine East. And they formed this committee because in those days, Maine East was, all white. But even within the student population of, 4,500 or close to 5,000 as I recall, there were real differences. And there were people who felt alienated, felt left out, felt marginalized, didn't like other kids. So there were some scuffles, there were some, fights in the parking lot, and things were happening that were troubling to all of us. So the administration put together this committee, and they chose, students from different groups that were at the high school. And they said, you've got to meet and figure out how you are all going to get along. I will never forget that. And it was terrific, because some of the people on the committee, there was one really big guy, and if I saw him coming down the hall, I'd go to the other side, and I was scared of him. But he was a leader among a certain group of students, and sitting around that table, I found him to be really thoughtful and able to express what was on his mind, and a lot of the kids that he felt were being kind of, left out of what was going on at school. So that was my first experience of trying to figure out how to reconcile different points of view and different student perspectives. So I really believe that that should be a constant in our education system, because we've got to figure out how we're going to live together and work together. The United States still has, by far, the best dynamism because of our diversity. I mean, we have people from all over, some who've been here from the Mayflower, some who, came over seeking refuge. We have people who are determined to make more out of their lives, want to give their kids a better life. We should be trying to figure out how that's all going to work and how to make it possible for everybody's contribution to be recognized and appreciated. So I think on the local level we need to do that, and on the national level I'm a bit stumped right now, because we're in a constitutional crisis, and it's very sad to me. I've worked with and known most presidents going back to Nixon. I've agreed and disagreed with presidents of my party and the other party, but I've never felt this worry that what's happening is undermining our national unity and causing threats to our national security. So we're in a crisis. And that will make it even more difficult to try to cross lines, because there's an impeachment inquiry that's been opened to investigate the president's behavior and people around him that I think rightly deserves to be investigated. So how do you, even in the midst of this crisis, do what I think our founders expected us to do? They wouldn't have put impeachment into the Constitution if they thought elections were the answer to misbehavior or abuse of power. So they put it in the Constitution, and I have to tell you, I was on the impeachment staff back in 1974. I was a very young lawyer just out of law school, and I worked with tremendous lawyers, totally Republicans and Democrats, totally unbiased, only focused on trying to get the facts and the evidence, and eventually it led to the House committee voting to impeach President Nixon on abuse of power, obstruction of justice, contempt of Congress. And after the House voted, and in my book I have a book we just did, I have a section about Barbara Jordan, and you should YouTube her speech at that moment in our history. Anyway, I was so struck at that moment that 4 Republican House members voted in favor of the articles of impeachment. They put their country over party, they put the Constitution over their personal political interests. And after that vote, before it went to the House for a full vote, Republican senators, including Barry Goldwater, went to the White House and told Nixon that he should resign for the good of the country. Another person I write about in the book is Margaret Chase Smith. She was a Republican woman senator from Maine. She was the first Republican senator who criticized and made a speech on the Senate floor against Joseph McCarthy and his slash and burn tactics that were accusing everybody of being communist. And she did it. She was very courageous. She was pretty much alone. That's what I'm looking for right now. I'm looking for Republicans. Because what is happening is Republicans who finally know they cannot defend the president anymore, they quit. You just had an Illinois Congressman, John Shimkus, say, I'm not going to run again and I can't support Trump. I want to see people who are willing to stay in the political process say the same thing too.
Yeah, I think it's so incredible that you're pushing for such immense change and reform, because that's what we really need right now. And with that being said, it is mentioned that during your time in Park Ridge, you babysat for the children of migrant workers. And with that in mind, how does it feel knowing that you did so much for children of migrants? How does it feel to see the current situation at our southern border?
It really makes me so sad and just sick at heart. Again, this was a program through our church. You know, we lived in Park Ridge in our early years before there was an O'Hare Airport. In fact, I remember going out to the airport when it was being built. We were, don't tell anybody, skateboarding through some of what were to become terminals. We snuck in. And so we had lots of farms around Park Ridge. And every fall, migrants would come. They had a trail, in effect. They would come from Texas. They would be picking crops all the way up, and they would, you know, get to where we were. And so for a few weeks, maybe even a few months in the fall, and then sometimes in the spring, we'd have older migrant children at our school, at field school. I can really remember that. And then, you know, the families would move on to the next harvest or the next planting. So our church was aware of the problem that happened on weekends, because the migrants would live in camps out at these farms, kind of where O'Hare is, and they would have to work in the fields on the weekends, and they would also have their older children, and by older children I mean, like, you know, 7 and older, work with them. And they had no one to watch their younger children, because the whole family would be out working and the younger children would be left. So our church arranged for us to gather up some young, you know, I don't know how old we were, 12, 13, 14, something like that, to go out to these camps and watch the kids while their parents and their older siblings worked. So I remember, you know, my mother drove me out, or my father. We went out to the camp, and we got out there early in the morning, and we watched the kids until, you know, 4 o'clock. And I will never forget the first day I was there. You know, we'd bring games and balls, and, you know, obviously for the little kids, you know, trying to get them to take a nap, all the things you do when you babysit. And so at the end of all these trailers that were in the camp where the families lived, there was a dirt road and then another dirt road, and there was like an old school bus that brought the families home from the fields. It was like 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And I will never forget how all these little kids, immediately when they saw that bus, started running down that road to see their parents, and how tired and dusty the parents, the mothers and the fathers, the older siblings were, the aunts and the uncles, and they'd get off that bus, and these little kids would throw themselves into their parents' arms or their big brother or sister's arms. And I remember, I had this distinct memory of thinking, wow, that's what I used to do when my dad would come home from work. I remember, you know, when I was 3 and 4 and 5, I'd be so excited. He'd come home from work, and I would run, and he'd, you know, jump into his arms. And I thought, wow, that's just what I did. And somehow that made a huge impression on me as a young girl. Like, these people are doing this really hard work, but they're families like I am, and like I have. They just have a different way of living and a different way of making a living. So when this, look, we have to have secure borders. I mean, that is a fallacy to say, oh, open borders, let everybody come. You can't do that. I was in the Senate, I was Secretary of State, I totally understand that. But the idea that we are ripping families apart, that we are putting children in cages, that we are sending children off to be warehoused in other parts of the country away from their parents, their aunts, their uncles, older siblings, is just so wrong. If we can have a sensible, humane, secure immigration policy, and that's what we should be aiming for. But we should not be inflicting cruelty and trauma on these children. And so that's why
adults who are parents, teachers, statesmen, and women. And we've just got such a great group here, but what would you say specifically to the younger girls, maybe the Girl Scouts over there, who want to go into leadership roles, who want to make an impact, who specifically in male-dominated fields?
Well, I was a Girl Scout. I started as a brownie at field school and then became a Girl Scout, and I was in Girl Scouts all the way into high school. I ended up being, in those days, it was called a Mariner Scout. I was interested in, badges and things having to do with the water. And I think that, first of all, being in Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts, being in school and trying to learn as much as you can, being in extracurricular activities, developing your own passions, as the mayor said, I mean, really trying to find out what you care about and what you're interested in. Because there are many different ways of leading. You don't have to run for elected office to lead. You can lead as an educator, as a healer, as an activist. There's so many ways to lead, and that's one of the reasons I wrote this book, because we wanted to share women who inspired us, and not very many in the book ran for office, but they did great things, like start the Girl Scouts, for example, or start the Red Cross, or be an advocate for others who are less advantaged or need extra help, like in education. So I think that as a girl, and then as a young woman, and as an adult, it's really important, if you want to be a leader, to learn as much as you can and understand what you care about. Because you'll be a much better leader if you're working in a field you care about. Be the best principal you can be. Be the best business leader you can be. Anne Drake, who you saw up here, she's a great businesswoman. If you want to be a leader in any area, you've got to pick an area that you feel passionate about and that you can jump in wholeheartedly. When it comes to leadership, there are certain skills that you should learn. You should learn how to speak in front of people, because no matter where your leadership leads you, that is a very important skill. I took speech at Maine East as a sophomore. I was the only girl in the class. The class had a reputation as being kind of easy, and it was filled with football players who were great guys, but weren't all that interested in speaking, except to make fun of me when I was trying to speak. But I'll tell you, being harassed, the teacher would sit in the back, we had to make our presentations, and the guys would all sit in the front, and being harassed while I was speaking prepared me for a lot of later. But there are intangibles. I think that a good leader, a leader who wants to make a positive difference in the lives of other people, a good leader has empathy. A good leader, as we were talking earlier, I was so grateful to be exposed by my church to people not like me, to young people who lived very different experiences on the south side of Chicago. It really helped me develop an understanding of what their lives were like. And so developing empathy so that you can key in on what people are needing, and you can understand the different needs that they bring to you as a leader. I don't think that there's any substitute for listening. And listening is a skill that you can practice and learn. And it's one that has certainly taught me a lot, because if you're listening more than you're talking, you're actually learning something from somebody else. So these are all skills that the Girl Scouts inculcate. I think my friend Suki Stanley is here. Her mother was my brownie leader, and I still remember those brownie songs like "Make New Friends but Keep the Old, one is silver, the other gold." Well, mean, those little lessons, it sounds kind of hokey and corny, but it's no more hokey and corny than quotes on Instagram. I mean, you know, you learn where you learn, and you get, you know, you get advice wherever you get it. And we had a great Brownie leader. So I guess that for me, it is developing not only your external skills, but your internal values, and how you then marry the two, and how you try to be a positive influence in your leadership for people, and not just in it to feather your nest or stroke your ego, but to really try to help people live the best lives that they can live.
I think that it's very vital that young leaders learn how to not only sympathize, but more importantly, empathize with others. So I think that's a very important message that you're trying to get across, and we really appreciate that. And it is mentioned in the documentary that growing up, your father pushed you to be so persistent and diligent and very, very hardworking. Well, if he were here today, what would you say to him?
Wow. Yes, my father was a chief petty officer in the Navy, and his job was to train young sailors up at Great Lakes Naval Base to be sent off to war in the Pacific. So he was a stern, demanding man in his military career during World War II. And he was really demanding in his fathering. And I think there's a connection between the two, because when he died back in 1993, I got a lot of letters from sailors he had trained, and some pictures of my dad as a young naval officer with the very young sailors surrounding him at a graduating ceremony before they shipped out. And these men said, you know, your dad taught me discipline, your dad held me to high standards, your dad really made a difference in my life. And that was very touching to me, because, you know, when you're someone's child who is very demanding, you know, I would come home with good grades and my father would say, you must go to an easy school. You know? It can be a little challenging, and but in retrospect, I really appreciate the way my parents were kind of a tag team. You know, my mother emphasizing, you know, empathy and kindness and putting yourself in somebody else's shoes and all that. And my father saying, you know, it's a tough world out there, you gotta be prepared, you gotta work hard, you gotta make your own way. And so, you know, he never saw me have a political career, which wasn't anything I thought I would do until years after he died. But if he were here, I think he would be really excited to be back in Park Ridge, because you know, this was his dream. When we moved out of Chicago when I was 3, as Ernie Ricketts says in the documentary, in 1950. And so he really thought this was the best place to raise kids. He was so proud of living here. And I think he would be really happy. He'd be happy. He'd get to, you know, he'd get to see how my daughter turned out. He'd get to see my 3 grandchildren. So I think he would say, you know, you've done good so far, but what's next? You know, don't rest on your laurels. I want to end with just a personal reflection. My friend Bonnie was up here giving that really wonderful tribute to Betsy and talking about the importance of friendships. And I want to end by emphasizing this, because we do have students from elementary into high school here. And I just want to emphasize the importance of friends. And if you only have just one friend, but it's a good friend, it's a friend who can be honest with you, and a friend who can support you, and a friend who is there when you need her or him, you've got a great friendship. If you're lucky enough, as I was, to have a circle of friends, both girls and boys growing up, because as Ernie said, I walked to kindergarten with him the first day to field school, and we graduated together from Maine South all those years later. your friends can be a really important part of you finding out who you are. You know, you shouldn't stay friends with somebody who's a negative influence, believe me. I've had that experience too, don't do that. But for people who really care about you, you care about each other, and you're in it together. And that was what was so wonderful about my friend Betsy, who we are all really missing today, because this was her creative idea, and along with John, made it come to fruition, and I thank the Park Ridge Historical Society for that. But she was a friend through good times and bad. She was a friend no matter what was happening in my life, and I tried to be a good friend to her no matter what was happening in her life. And that kind of bond made me a better person, made me a person who was really guided and supported by somebody who was good to the very soul of her feet as well as her heart. And so, value your friends and stay in touch with them when you go off to do whatever you do after graduation. Because they knew you when. They knew you when you were a Brownie and a Girl Scout. They knew you when you were in elementary and junior high and high school. And they can continue to be a really important source of love and advice and honest criticism. You won't keep friends with everybody. There's natural drifting, and you need a friend like Betsy who kept us all together. I mean, she made sure that we all, came together whenever we could. But I just want to end on that note, because in many ways, this event today and this wonderful documentary that the students did is a tribute to friendship. And so, thank you for being part of it.